So, hello, my name is Karla Diaz, and we're here at Third World, and I'm interviewing Betty Marin, who's here. Say hi, Betty.
Hi, Karla. It's nice to be here.
How are you? Welcome back from, where were you? What planet?
I was in the Oregon planet.
The Oregon planet,
Yeah.
Portlandia,
Yeah,
right?
in Portland.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just finished my second year of my MFA in social practice there. And I'm getting ready for my last year, which
Yeah.
will be my third year, and I'll head back there in September.
For the end.
For the end.
That's great. Now you get to spend the summer here and be reading books, as you were telling me.
Yeah, it's always good to be home, and it always takes me like a few weeks to adjust to being back here.
Yeah.
But once I go through that adjustment period, like I feel really good here. Like I feel at home, and it's always nice to know that I can come here to Sandwich because I feel this is like an important part of being home. So.
Well, I just want to say a little bit, maybe for people who don't know, but Betty, you, as you say, you were finishing your last year of your MFA in public practice, right? At
social practice.
Social practice.
Yeah.
Public practice, social practice. Yeah. And also you did your undergraduate in Berkeley, right? And what was the program that you studied there that I think was really...
it was called Peace and Conflict Studies.
Peace and Conflict Studies. And that's how we first met after your first year. But of course you're here from Wilmington, so you've been working with us for a while now, right? Maybe like 5 years, I think, or less.
Yeah, I think I met you maybe sometime in 2005, but then I didn't work with you so much until like 2010.
2010.
So like about 3 years.
Yeah.
But a solid year.
Yeah.
Like 2010, 2011. Yeah.
And why did you get? I'm so curious to get, because I never had this conversation with you, which is really great. But why did you get your undergraduate degree in peace and justice, right?
Yeah, it was. The full long name is Peace and Conflict Studies, but it's generally the study of peace. So understanding how to reach peace, and in order to understand that, you have to understand how problems are created, especially like structural problems, like poverty and racism and other like sort of like large scale problems. And I majored in that because when I was finishing high school, I was being politicized, I guess, for the first time, learning about different social movements and just learning about social change and that kind of thing in general. And so I wanted to study something that was going to help me like build on that, because I was sort of like feeling engaged and committed to social change and social justice. And so I chose that major because I felt like it was going to help me get a strong foundation. And it did. It's like a very interdisciplinary major. So when people hear the name, they always think it's about conflict resolution, which is one thing, one aspect of it. But I think the larger aspect is just like understanding sort of like the theory around structural global problems, and also the theory around how does change happen, how can peace happen with regards to these different problems.
Wow, that must have been really an interesting kind of major to do. Like your classes must have been really interesting, because you could draw from a lot of different other disciplines, I'm sure, right? To get, like, you were studying from like anywhere from, I'm just guessing, from literature to maybe economics to politics, to everything that you could draw from that.
Yeah, that was the nice thing about that major, was that it wasn't just like an insular department. It was very much like you have your core classes to give you a foundation, but then you're able to kind of design how you learn what you want to learn. So I did take classes in political science and Native American studies and Chicano studies and sociology, and so it was a good experience.
And that helped you. I mean, I don't know if it has, but maybe do you think that kind of helped you a little bit towards like now your practice and your work, or how do you see that?
It's been an interesting process or trajectory for me in terms of like figuring out who I am and what I want to do, and so I jumped into my undergrad with this focus on issues of social justice, and then as I was finishing at my undergrad, I was thinking more about art, which was another passion, before I started college, but in some ways I had set it aside. So I was trying to figure out ways to reconnect with this idea of art making and painting, which is part of my background. So I was feeling like I was missing that when I was leaving my undergrad. So as I left my undergrad, one of the commitments that I made to myself was that I wanted to do things that were going to allow me to do work around social justice, but also art. So one of the first places that I worked at was after leaving college was Spark, the Social and Public Art Resource Center out in Venice. It's a big mural and public art organization, and so that was a good experience for me too, just to kind of learn about an organization that started over 30 years ago, and just how they've kind of built themselves up and how they do community art. But in the last few years, it's been kind of this back and forth of me figuring out where I'm going to put my energy. And so after that, I was in Mexico doing educational work around U.S.
Tell
policy.
us about that. Yeah, what was that program called that you went and did in Mexico?
It was called Witness for Peace.
Yeah.
So it's been just kind of funny, like figuring out what I want to do. But that work was more focused on educational work, which is a major passion for me, and it was solidified when I was there that I really like to facilitate things. I like to teach. I like to sort of be in those kind of workshop settings.
Was it in the communities, like Native American communities there in Mexico, or was it like through a specific university, or how did?
It was the organization is actually based in different parts of the world, well, in Latin America and in the U.S., but our program was in Oaxaca, which is a largely indigenous state in Mexico. But the way we did the work was that we had partnerships with lots of NGOs in Mexico. So the visits by people coming from the U.S. were always a mix of like doing our own internal workshops about history and economic policy in Mexico, and then meeting with NGOs, and then going and doing a community visit in a rural community, which was often an indigenous community. So getting more of the direct kind of
contact
with people whose families have been migrating to the U.S., and kind of hearing firsthand about what the root causes of that is.
And you did that for a year or two?
Did that for 2 years.
2 years. Wow. Yeah. So you were there for a while. Right?
Yeah.
Wow.
So
and then from there you came back here.
Yeah, I came back here, and that's when I reconnected with you all and started to work with you in a more
with the kids,
consistent way. So it was really good to come back and be at Slangwich, because I was really excited about doing educational work, but I again was feeling that push, like where am I making art? How can I make art? And so you all provided like the perfect space for me to build off the educational work that I was doing, but I'll start to integrate other things into it.
And tell him just a little bit generally the class that you taught, because I know people may not be familiar with the class that you taught here.
Yeah, so it was called Food Fight, and it was a curriculum that was based on sort of like a classical drawing class, but mixing in different food issues. So talking about the importance of corn in Latin America, since a lot of the kids who come to Slangwich are kids of Latin American descent, and then building off of that and just talking about food in general, in terms of like what is organic food, what is processed food, how do we plant food.
Then you took them to your dad's garden, which was great. I mean, they all had a great time, going over there.
Yeah.
And you had some amazing kids in that class.
It was
really so smart. They were smarter than me a lot of time.
We did. We had some really knowledgeable kids, and they were very engaged. It was a great class and a really good experience. And we went to my dad's garden, and so they got to see firsthand, like someone who spends a lot of time planting and growing food, and so that was really wonderful. And just being around this space is special because it is so interdisciplinary, in my opinion, in the way that you approach art and just like life in general.
So that worked out for you. But now I hear when you're from somebody whose name I'm not going to say, but that you made a book about a project or one of your projects in Portland. Yeah. So tell me about that. What is that you've been working on?
So also I just wanted to say that one of the reasons that I ended up in the program that I'm in was based on conversations with you and Mario about, well, what do I do next? Like, what's the right art program for me? And kind of getting encouragement to look into public practice and social practice, and not like a traditional MFA. But so that's how I landed in Portland. And this last year, I did a project with the Portland Art Museum called The Portland Art Museum Welcomes You. And the project came out of a partnership we had with the museum to do a one-night event where we just do like interactive projects, interventions in the museum. But they can happen on the one night, or they can also be stuff that leads up to that one night. So the project that I proposed was this one, and it was all about trying to investigate the culture of greeting and welcome within the museum, because museums are such kind of intimidating institutions a lot of the time, and they're not necessarily the most open places. Like not everybody goes to museums. It's generally a pretty select group of people. So I was interested in those questions, and the way that I wanted to learn about that was to just to have conversations with people who work there about how they greet and how they welcome others. So I interviewed about 15 people who worked there, and had short conversations, but interesting conversations, asking them like where they're from and what the culture of greeting is there, and then maybe how that's changed throughout their lives. And then at the end of every interview, I asked them to offer me a greeting that they would like to exist in the museum. So then they all greeted me in this preferred greeting that they think should be part of the spirit of the museum. So from those interviews, and I got to interview people from like maintenance, and people from marketing, and people from education, and the director actually of the museum participated, which was pretty generous of him too as well. But from the interviews and the photographs documenting the greetings, I made this little book that basically has transcriptions of the interviews, and then the photo of that greeting that they offered me.
So what kind of greetings did you get? Were you from like a handshake? Did anybody kiss you on the cheek? And
I was really hoping for a wide, diversity of greetings. But, in the end, I got like a spectrum from just simple eye contact all the way to like a hug and a kiss. So that was as intimate as it got. So it was great, because like I think some people were more shy, but I think it was good when people were kind of honest about how they actually greet, and and I could, eye contact is a really powerful thing, and so that was.
It's interesting that you say that too, because I mean, a little bit different, but we always talk about here at the studio. I was talking with Mario about how we greet people from different countries, and we're like, I have to think. There's also a cultural thing that happens there where when we go to Italy, like we're always hugging and kissing on both sides of the cheek, always doing the dance, and it would like hug and kiss, and it doesn't matter if it's like guys, right? And but here there's certain people, it's very much like it's a distance. There's like the greeting you handshake, and even a hug, it's too much, So we always laugh because we call it like a dance, because sometimes we don't even know, because in some countries, like, you get to kiss both cheeks, right? But on us, we just do it one side. So when I'm in another country, sometimes I forget to kiss both sides, so I'm like doing a dance, like
where do I start?
How do I go? And then I always forget which side goes first. So I end up almost trying to kiss them on the mouth because I forgot that it's the left first or the right hand side first.
Yeah, totally.
So and then it becomes awkward because you're like, you don't know how to dance, you don't know how to like kiss and hug and greet,
Exactly.
But now I like set this like rule of thumb, like I'll hug people anyway, like I'm a hugger, and I'm just like, I don't care where they're from, or you get a hug, and some people are like, oh, okay,
totally.
But there's also something has to do with that kind of, I don't know, cultural thing, like as being the way you greet people or receptive towards certain things. I don't know.
Yeah, exactly.
But I was thinking about that when we have friends coming in from Switzerland last time, and they do kiss on the cheek, but it's not so much of a hug, and I was like, okay, so I gotta sit down and please somebody tell me the rules. I'm just gonna hug and kiss everybody, But that's great that you get to do an actual like book and documenting the project. How long did it last? Was it like only a day, you said, or
it was week? The interviews were over a few days, and then making the book was a few weeks.
Yeah,
and then the actual event where the book was shared with the public was just one night. Yeah. Okay. And actually, the most of the books that I made, I've taken back to the museum, and so I'm hoping that they start a conversation within the museum. Yeah. Because I feel like that was the most immediate audience was the actual museum staff and people who work there, and then the public was more secondary. But,
that's great. And I mean, I know for a fact also that you're a painter, right? Has that anything like come into play into any of your work now, or thinking about things in any way? I mean, they don't have to necessarily, obviously, with the other projects that you're doing, but I'm just wondering if that has been still something that is active or present in what you're working on now.
Right. Yeah, I haven't painted very much, or probably almost at all, in the context of the program. I've painted a little bit, like in your spare time that I've tried to. And that's a big question I have is how to fit that in, and whether I want to fit it in, or if it's just a separate thing, that I also paint, and I also do this, or if there's other ways to integrate that. And I think I'm still wondering that.
Yeah, how that fits into that. Because mainly, I mean, when you're just looking at your paintings, some of them are really amazing, and you mainly paint with oil, right? And a lot of them are like portraits of people or family, or the people, your family, friends, people. I mean, I don't know if that's something that has become secondary right now, because I know you're working on these other projects. But I often feel like sometimes our own kind of practice or things that we do that we just know, like I'm a writer also, right? So they kind of perk in moments that you're like, that you don't know you're using skills based on that craft.
Right.
Does that make sense?
No,
So,
yeah, I totally.
Like your kind of composition in a way, I guess. Even in just looking at the books and interviewing these people,
right?
You know, seems to be of some of the people that you know. So I think that there's kind of ways that can kind of be related to that. It's just kind of, sometimes we're not, like, I'm not so, it didn't become clear that I was using or drawing upon those skills until somebody pointed it out. Like, for instance, I'm a poet, right?
Yeah.
So a lot of my sayings or the way I see the world comes out as a poet. Very poetic. You know, so when I see things and I put things together and I arrange things are very poetic, very abstract in a lot of ways, but very poignant also. Like poetry and poems are usually shorter. They're like novels, right? They're like longer. And so I always try to get to the point and poignancy and shorter. You know? So if I'm going to make like whatever arrangement I make or whatever thing I make, I want to get to the short end of it. I want to do it you know, to the point. And then sometimes it's also like, I don't just like objects for being objects. I want them to, I was like, I always have to ask, so what? Where is the poetry in it? You know what I mean? So I always have to come back to that. Where's the metaphor? Where is that, you know?
Right. So is it important for you to also keep a consistent writing practice, or?
I think to me, before it was more of a consistency. To me, it's important that I do it anyway. Whether, like, before I think my logistic was a little bit like how you are maybe thinking about, like that everything has to be either or, you know, or one section. But like, for instance, I think it's important that I keep writing, but not necessarily for the public, or not necessarily for anybody to see it, or not necessarily to be shown, you know? And there's a really good kind of like analogy, like there was like this Native American dance troupe that they were like, you know, they were doing a lot of the traditional dances, right? And one of the elders was talking about how when they do their dances, you know, they go to concerts, and not concerts, but festivals or traditional like dance festivals, and they show around in different communities, not just in the immediate Native American community, but in other different communities. They come to museums and do their dances, the traditional, and they share with people, right? So one of the things that he was mentioning, though, is how important it is for them to dance for themselves. You know, where they're not putting up a show, they're not practicing to put a festival or show other people their traditional regalia and stuff, but it's just them in their house, or you know, doing it for themselves. You know, whether it's just them by themselves or their own family, you know. So I think that's such an important kind of thing. When I heard that, it kind of brought it back to my own, because I always felt like, well, if I have to write something, it has to go in a book or in a magazine, or it has to be somehow disseminated. And I think that's an important kind of key of dissemination, of like how far you want that to be disseminated. Sometimes, and that kind of had stopped me for a while, because I was like, this is not going to be disseminated. This is not going to pass in a magazine, because it's only like going to be, magazines want like certain, you know, structure, and it has to be so many words, and it's going to talk about this certain thing, right? So all of those are kind of these outside kind of parameters that you're giving yourself going in that. Not that it's bad, it's just that when you are allowing your creativity to flow, there has to be the space, or whatever you feel comfortable with, that doesn't have to think about that first, because you're morely important and like what the creativity part of that idea, you know. So I think sometimes the work that happens is sometimes I have to write first, and then I can go on to thinking visually, or sometimes I think visually and then I can write, you know. And sometimes it goes hand in hand. Like sometimes my journal, since I was a kid, would always be like a writing and then a picture, you know. And it didn't necessarily translate literally like one to the other. They were not necessarily like connected to each other, but it was just like that.
Right.
I would just write something and then I would draw something, you know. So for me, it was really hard to always connect those. And then but I think you can, you know. I mean, I'm not saying right now you're still working through your thesis, but don't lose sidetrack of your painting, you know, the way you can extend that. And then what does painting mean? I mean, not just specifically the painting on a canvas, but what else?
Right. Like
elements of that, you know, like portraiture, you know.
Right.
Portraiture can be like broken down into many different things, you know. Maybe your way of doing certain things could be a way of you doing portraiture landscapes, you know, not traditionally speaking, but through you are working with people and right and spaces. So anyway, so just to think about that, but I was really excited to see about that project because I hadn't heard about it, and I was like, she made a book. That's awesome, Betty. Did you put your name there, Betty? Like in big lights. Did you sign it? Sign the copy?
I did. I signed your copy, and I did put like a little digital signature.
Yeah.
Too.
But you also, the other thing I wanted to talk to you, because you're the only person that I think would understand this facilitation of things. Because, Brian, I mean, and when you brought it up when you were talking about your degree in peace and resolution, that's such an important thing that I don't know if a lot of people talk to you about that, but like, how do you, I mean, what is the aim to get peace, right? When you're working with a group of people, let's say you were working with the museum or a community, a certain community, like facilitating that group of people versus, let's say, the intent or the aim of having to mediate something that is a peaceful conversation, let's say, right? I mean, there's all these different factors when you're working with a community and artists. Do you feel like oftentimes that you are like that you're drawing more, the intent behind the work that you're doing is more trying to have a conversation or trying to have a goal at the end, like let's say to get these people to, I don't know, to talk to each other, you know. And the reason I'm asking that is because for instance, we went to Philadelphia. We were looking at these murals that the people were doing there. And they had these two communities that we're working with. One of them was prisoners. The other one was the victims, right? So, and one of the things they brought up is that first they tried to facilitate and to have like a conversation for the people who were the victims and or families of the victims to talk to the prisoners and to both work together to make one mural. Okay, so it was very difficult.
Yeah,
so difficult, as you can imagine.
Right.
Like both sides of right of the groups, and they could not do it. They could not do it. So they, in a way, it was, you know, I don't know. I ended up thinking about what was that. How did that work towards, let's say, the aim, which was like a mural, you know, that they ended up, so they had to do two murals. One was depicting the imagery of the prisoners, and then the other one was depicting imagery of the victims, right? So it was both sides, and then I don't know what the aim. They did say some of them were able to start a conversation, but did they were not able to accomplish their goal or their intent, their final thing. Do you always, when you work on a project, do you have like a set of an idea of a parameter of like that kind of thing? Like, my aim is to have a peaceful conversation, to be able to delegate this at the end, or how do you work when you work with community, you know?
I think I try to have some goals so that I have a plan to try to meet those goals. But I try to keep it so that it's so that I'm also leaving room for like learning something else, and not just feeling like, oh, I have to meet this goal, and if I don't meet it, then it's a failure. But more having goals in order to create like the process that I think is gonna help me get there, but not necessarily feeling like that's the only direction it can take. But yeah, I like your sort of perspective on like this idea of creating conversations between distinct groups, because I do feel like that's something that I'm really interested in, and that's something that I'm trying to do in my last year is, you know, in particular, like looking at who the Latin American immigrant community is in Portland, and who the so-called kind of mainstream community is in Portland, and trying to create some sort of dialogue between those two groups.
And have you been working with the immigrant community there?
Yeah, I've been connecting with the Farm Worker Union and also the Day Labor Center, and so I have 2 projects that I'm trying to do with them, those 2 groups in particular. And then also, right before I came back, I did. I hosted a screening at a local theater of a popular telenovela.
Which one is it? Maybe I watched it.
Maybe. Por ella soy Eva.
Oh, I've heard of it.
It won the best telenovela of 2013. So,
and what does that translate into?
Por ella soy Eva. So they gave it a different name in English, but it's like for her, I am Eva. It's a complicated plot that I won't get into right now. But
they always have a crazy. They has to involve a crazy, like either 2 women and 1 man, right? Or like a crazy. What was the other one? 2 women, 1 road. Dos caminos. Una mujer, dos caminos.
Dos mujeres, un camino. Yeah.
But you know, telenovelas are popular all over. Like even my Filipino friends who like they're avidly like they know the telenovelas, right? It's like, I don't know if so much here in the United States. I don't know. I mean, they still have soap operas.
No, I think so.
But all over Latin America, it's like that and the news. That's it.
And other parts of the world too.
Yeah,
that they've imported like Latin American soap operas to Eastern Europe, to all kinds of places. So I was bringing it up because, that's why I'm interested in them, because they're so like incredibly popular, and they're so weird and problematic in a lot of ways. But I wanted to create a space that was bilingual, and that I was that hopefully bring again these 2 different populations. So like more of the immigrant population and more of the kind of like young white sort of population of Portland. And so I used the novela as a way to, like, as a medium for conversation. So it turned out to be a good event, and we did it all bilingual, and it was based on sort of just watching pieces of the novela and then talking about like, well, what are the problems in the novela? How are they presented, and how are they, you know, different or the same to the problems in my own life, and also how I resolve the problems in my own life. So we did it in small groups, and then each group presented a skit of like resolving a problem in the novela in a different way.
Were they hilarious?
Yes. They were hilarious. Some were sillier than others, but they were all pretty entertaining to watch.
So the people that did the skits, were they normal? Not normal, because I'm not normal. But were they, what I meant to say, were they just people who were not trained actors, or
it was
were
just
they-
random people who wanted
Oh.
to come to the event, and so it was a mix of people in my program because I got help
Yeah.
for facilitating, and then people from mostly like immigrant rights organizations that I've also connected with, and then some just random audience people people who go to that theater, because it's sort of like a traditional theater, like they have just regular films, but they're also interested in more kind of like education and stuff, so
that's great.
they open themselves up to our program to just like propose different participatory kind of screenings.
That's great. And
So-
it was bilingual too.
It was bilingual, and so that was
How did you document it with?
I just took photos.
Photographs.
It would have probably been good to record some of it, but I didn't. But yeah, it was just. I also, something that I'm interested in is just bilingual spaces, like having spaces that everyone understands, but also everyone gets a chance to listen to other languages.
Yeah.
So we did it that way. We did it like everything Spanish, English, Spanish. So everybody heard things twice.
Do you feel like there's a stigma of like speaking? I mean, right now you're working with bilingual community, mainly in Spanish and English. But do you feel that there's like that stigma there? Because I know in Los Angeles is also there is this under kind of. Maybe not to a lot of people who just come here and visit, they don't understand it. But if you're growing up here, that there's a kind of stigma. There's a stigma about that that you're speaking Spanish, And I'll give you an example. With the other day, this just happened. There were these two men who were going to rent a hotel because we just came from up north, and they had reserved for 2 people for 2 nights, right? But they didn't know how to speak English, and I was just in the back, like there was another woman in front of me, and then there were the 2 guys, and I was just trying to listen to the conversation to see how far I could step in and be like, can I help you translate? But I didn't know if they knew how to speak English, because at first they were like 2, and they showed a paper. I guess they did the reservation online. Their boss did the reservation online, and then they just thought we're just gonna pay and stay the night. So then I kind of had to step in and translate, because they would just say 2, and the lady was like, no, 2 people is more, and then the woman that was there, and she was just getting so annoyed. Like I could see her face just getting really irritated, and I don't know. There is a kind of stigma in some ways. If you speak more Spanish than English here, if you don't speak the other. I mean, I guess in other neighborhoods you feel more comfortable with everybody there speaks Spanish, but in Miami, for instance, everybody feels like. At least I felt the time that I was there, like, if you speak Spanish, that's great, because everybody pretty much speaks Spanish, So I guess it depends on that. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I think you're right that it kind of depends. Like even in Wilmington, where there's a lot of Spanish speakers here. There's certain places where people don't want to be spoken to in Spanish. I feel like, or they feel like you're looking down on them or something if you speak in Spanish rather than. But in Portland, it's interesting because it's kind of a place where you don't hear as much Spanish, because there just isn't as many people who speak Spanish living there, or they're just living more on the outskirts or around the city and not like really in the center of the city. But Portland, it's kind of a mix. Like you have, I feel like a part of the population there that's kind of open to sort of and curious about like who these immigrant populations are and their languages and stuff like that. And then I think there's another part of the population that is more closed off and more like, like you were saying, more like impatient and looking down upon those types of groups. But in I think there goes the fire truck.
There's a fire truck.
Yeah, in that event, I think it was people who were already interested in the Spanish language because they knew they were coming to like a telenovela,
Right.
So it felt like people,
Yeah.
they did okay with
Yeah.
having it be bilingual, and like it's not always smooth to have
Yeah.
consecutive interpretation happening,
Yeah.
but I think they were
But
open to it.
Yeah, and I mean, and when you're dealing more than one language, it's becomes a little bit more, I think,
Yeah.
more. I mean, it drives another group of people, but I'm sure it can be also more complicated.
Yeah, it just takes longer. It is. Yeah.
Right, with 3 languages, right? It's like I have to translate this to this.
Yeah.
To this, and translation is very interesting as well, right? When you're translating, not just because you're translated exactly, right? With
Right.
the word, what's being happened, translation. But then how do you then from there gather that information, right?
Yeah.
Document that. So yeah, maybe video camera or something might be good next time. You can document the work.
Yeah, definitely.
Because I always forget about that. I always feel like
Yeah.
you're putting that together, and that has happened to me many times.
Yeah.
Because you're just making the things happen that you forget about.
Right.
Well, how is this going to be seen, or how is this going to be documented?
Yeah.
Like, oh, who cares? My camera broke, which is one of the things when we first started the space here. We didn't have, I mean, we had cameras somewhere,
Yeah.
but you're so involved in
Right.
coordinating everything that
Yeah.
the last thing you
It's
remember
like-
is
exactly.
like, oh yeah, somebody take pictures, please.
I know.
You know?
Totally.
Like everybody get the food, the DJ, everybody, the work is installed,
care of
that,
the people,
everything.
yeah.
Yeah. So that's, it's, it happens. Anyway.
Yeah.
Well, I'm just so happy that you came and the work that you've been doing here, and that, it's always good to have you back. So come back every summer.
I will, and I'll probably, move back here when I graduate. So I hope to
Well, you'll be,
stay
we'll
connected,
be here.
and
We're gonna be here
as much
and
as
then-
possible. Yeah.
Yeah. So I can't believe it that it's been like you only have 1 year left.
Yeah.
I mean,
It's
it
been
seems
3
like
years already.
it's
Yeah.
gone so fast.
It's gone.
You
Yeah.
know?
Now it feels that way.
Like now things are
Yeah.
picking up, and then you have this amazing conference that happens every summer, which you're also deeply involved, right?
Yeah.
in setting it up, and it's the social practice conference, annual conference that happens, right?
Right. Yeah. It's called Open Engagement, and it's been happening pretty much in the spring, like in May every year.
Oh, in May.
This was the 4th year that it happened, and so yeah, for the last 2 years I've been helping with the planning of it, and
Yeah.
it's something that's actually being reworked now because it was just interesting how it started something much more small scale, like lower key, and then
Yeah.
it developed into this really like popular, like people coming from different parts of the world and definitely all over the country, and like curators and blah blah blah, those important art people. So now we're kind of like rethinking like how do you get it back to that engagement, to that conversation, to that participation, and not have it be so much about I guess schmoozing. But
did you get a good feedback from people about that? Is that what they were feeding? They were saying we
Yeah.
need to get it back to that.
I think some people have. Yeah, I think some people that we've talked to feel like it has been just kind of grown to this big thing, and that sometimes like the stuff like the panels and the way those types of things are set up aren't the best ways to have conversations because they're so formalized, I guess. And then the other thing that's happening is that because the students are planning it, we're not getting as much out of it. Because all of our energy is going to planning it and putting it
Right.
together and making it happen, and then like
Right.
we don't get to enjoy it as much as everybody else who
Right.
comes to town.
And you're the student, you should be able to get a
Exact-
lot from it. Yeah.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
that's another big thing that we're like, well, how do we make it work more
Yeah.
for us too?
Yeah. No, definitely you need that because yeah, ultimately it's almost like you're being like your job is to set this conference.
Right.
Like that's your job.
Yeah.
And then you don't. Because it's true, when you're putting up something, you don't get to enjoy it as
Right.
much as you would if you're like a student or somebody just staying for that.
Exactly.
So, and then also, what you really want to, it's hard to get something out of a conference like that when you're worried about, did you email so-and-so?
Right.
Is this person coming in? You're picking them up, or,
Right,
you know?
exactly.
Because you can be there listening, engaging with the people, asking questions, and that's important for you guys as students. I imagine, to have this conference. I imagine also the reason it kind of picked up, it's because this has been now this idea of the social public practice, right? Yeah. Has kind of grown a momentum or popularity, if you want to say that. In these last 3 or 4 years, this has been like, people have been saying a trend or whatever you want to call it, because a lot of, now we have more people, more graduate people, right, coming out of these programs. But also it's been kind of a thing that museums are also like keen to and open to, so that becomes automatically also something that is whatever new or they're open to doing or engaging, right? Yeah. But regardless of that, I that always comes with these other aspects of things when things become so big, right? Yeah. That where is the limitation there, or how do you go back to your original intent? And that always happens whether you're a big organization, whether it's just an event, whatever it is, like for us being at the studio, I think I always had to come back and ask Mario, what's our mission? What's our vision and our mission? What's our intent? And if that's delineating from it seems like we're going from that's not where I want to go. That's not where we want to go. So it's always good to keep coming back, because sometimes you do get excited about, well, we have a bigger budget and you have more people, and, right. And then, but you lose track of the intent behind that, which sometimes I am always a stickler for that, because I'd rather be 5 people, me. Yeah. 5 people in the room versus, 500, right? Yeah, exactly. 5 good people, that's it. Yeah. So anyway, but I'm really excited about that, and that also, it's giving you whatever experience that has given you. I'm sure it's contributed a lot to being able to organize these conferences. Yeah, right? Definitely. It's been a really good experience in your practice. Yeah. I'm sure that's also helped a lot. Yeah. So I can't wait to see your last project. What you're gonna do. Yeah. And have you coming back. And hopefully you can be on my graduate committee. Yeah. Sign you up. It's in the recording now. It's in there. Well, thank you, Betty, for coming and just doing this amazing interview with you and your work. And I can't wait to talk to you maybe in another couple of years and see what major things you're going to be doing. Thanks that far in advance. So this again was Karla Diaz, and we're here with Betty Marin. Thank you, Betty, again for coming. Thank you, Karla. We'll see you soon. It's a pleasure. Peace out. Bye.